Hey everyone, and Happy New Year. It's Cameron Robertson from 3PL Systems. I also have Michael Sternberg joining us. And our special guest today is Chris Fields from Zelh Logistics. I'm Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got started in logistics?
Yeah, before I do that, I want to say that I'm just happy to be back in the office in the new year. I feel like in our industry, December 1st hits and everybody just says, well, holidays are coming, shutdown time. And so I'm glad to be back in the office. But no, I'm at Zelh Logistics now, VP of Sales. I've been here about 7-8 months now. And prior to joining Zelh, I was at TQL for 15 years. Started there in 2008 in their headquarters. I moved to Tampa with a team of 6 and built that office to 250 plus, and then moved into various management roles and enterprise customer roles with them in the last few years.
Wow. So you just said you took a team down to Tampa. You had 6 guys, you said 5 or 6 guys, and you grew to 250 before you went into a management role. So I think it goes without saying you learned a little bit about building teams. Can you share with us some kind of key learnings, maybe things to look for, things to do that might help some of the people listening? Because that's a wealth of experience you could share with everyone.
Yeah, I'll say that ping pong tables and freight gongs aren't required.
Do they help though? Do they help at all?
Not really. But no, I think it comes down to energy, and energy is contagious in those offices. And you want to hire, this may sound cliche, but positive people who want to work together, who have energy. And you're right, I made some mistakes. I hired some people who had some really rough attitudes, but I go, man, they can sell. And it turns out that wasn't good. That was toxic. And, I'm a big fan of Brad Jacobs and all he's done with XPO and now his new company. And one thing he said was that, I don't want to be around people who are in a bad mood all the time. And I think that carries a lot of weight. So I really tried to stick to that, and it worked, but it wasn't without some mistakes along the way.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Cam. No, go ahead, dude.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that you said was energy in the office. A lot of tech companies, even us today, that's probably one of the things a lot of us miss out on is that energy in the office. But yeah, that sounds incredible. Mike,
yeah, it has to be genuine though. It can't just be raw, and throwing a beer drop on a Friday.
People want to be there. Yeah, you want people to be there. You want them to be actually excited. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely.
The energy thing's funny. Cam, you'll remember this. So when I first started at 3PL 7.5 years ago, it was a bunch of developers in an office in Long Beach up the street, and all the lights were off when I walked in the office. Okay. Literally, it was dark in the office, and I was like, hey, what are we doing? We need to turn the lights on. We need to. And for the first probably a month or so, the other employees were going to Cameron's. Who the hell is this guy turning the lights on? And Cameron was like, no, the energy is great. He's loud, and I know I was disruptive as hell to the office. But for me in sales, right, it's like turn the lights on, have some energy, talk, be positive. Don't be, like you said, don't be a jackass. I don't care if you can sell if you're a jackass, but bring some energy. And even today, that's why Cam and I come in the office. The rest of our team's remote, but Cam and I feed off of the energy of each other. And we come in here and do that on purpose, right?
Yeah. It's so funny you say that. And he's going to hate that I'm bringing this up, but we hired a new member of the team. And this morning I walked in the office and it was dark. And he was the last one to leave last night. I texted him immediately and said, the lights always stay on. They never And he's like, well, rookie mistake. Happen again. So that's funny though. But you're right. The energy, it's contagious. And you never know, especially on that brokerage side, and you're building a team, someone across the room may hear a tactic that worked, and then they start doing it. It just snowballs, and it's good for the whole office.
Yeah, absolutely. It's harder on the engineering side than it is probably the sales and business side. Because the engineers kind of want to be left alone. But
yeah, we had an office space that had some developers share a space with us, and that did not go over well.
I can imagine. So, one of the things when you're building teams, especially at the scale you built a team, there's a lot of failures that come with that. Tell us about some of the failures that you ran up against and how you overcame them, or what were the largest failures that others should watch out for when they're trying to scale a team from, like what you said, 6 to over 200.
Yeah, I made a couple of mistakes that I really learned from. I let some, let's call them B and C players, stay around a little too long. And they were guys I liked, but just because I liked them, you can't, that's too toxic for the office. And I think your A players, your good salespeople want to be around other good salespeople. So one thing I did say I was on the fence about someone, I knew who my superstars were. And this one I was not so sure of. I set them next to each other because those superstars, those A players don't want to be around B and C. So they either lifted them up or they pushed them out. So I learned from that. I think because of my success, because I was a top 5 broker at TQL for years, had one of the largest single weeks with them. And I think I was a bit stubborn when I went into management. And maybe I thought, well, I was one of the best. I know it all. I'm not going to listen to some of these new guys. So I would encourage toe stepping. The best ideas win. And it's not just, who's in charge calls the shots.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. That's actually a huge philosophy of Google. And one of the reasons they're so successful is that it doesn't matter what title you have or what your role is in the company. You'll have a meeting with a ton of people in a single room, and the new guy could have an incredible idea and override someone that's far above him in title. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And other companies should adopt that, because I see quite often where companies it's all about what's your title? Do you get to make the call? And if you get to make the call, that's the right decision. And that's not always the case. You have to listen to everyone in the organization to grow successfully. And, one of the other difficult things I think about scaling a team or growing a team, especially at the rate you did, is all the different personalities you have to deal with at the same time. How do you overcome that, dealing with so many different personalities on a single team and making sure that everyone vibes together and works well together?
That was difficult for me. And maybe that's one reason that I gravitated back towards sales after scaling that office, is because you said it, there are so many different personalities. I mean, you hear about breakups, you hear about issues outside of work. And I was just like, we're here to work. I can't get involved in those things. But you start to see little pockets form in the office, and the negativity they kind of go work together and those kind of things. But it goes back to being genuine and caring about those employees. And if you do that, you're gonna have a good relationship with them, because life happens. We all have bad days, and I'm not saying that those should be ignored, but it was tough as a manager who was so interested in sales to try and balance that.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, Chris, question for you. When you were building your team out, I assume, just like many of the other mega brokers, TQL is like a split model, right? You got like carrier sales, you got customer sales. You guys were like a split model, or were you guys cradle to grave over there?
They were cradle to grave for the most part. So
really?
Brokers would find the customers. They would build out teams around them where they may hand off load coverage, for example. And there was some back office accounting, but for the most part, the broker was involved in everything. And then there was
no way.
Yeah.
Wow. That's unique. I'm sure, as you know, like most of the other, mega brokers, for lack of a better term, are very much like customer sales, carrier sales. And the reason I asked, a big part of, you got to build a team, but also, in any business, like you got to form relationships with your vendors, your carriers, or your customers, your shippers in your case. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, like you said, you were a high performer on the sales side, right? And you had this bar set that like, what was possible. How did you instill those same barometers with your people you hired, and how did you also train them to kind of carry that same level of care with their customers and carriers? I'm sure that wasn't easy.
This as a sales guy. Find out what motivates them. So I'm not going to lie. I kept my
Give them a carrot, right?
I kept my numbers from when I was a broker. in the drawer in the desk. And when I knew one of my superstars he was getting a little cocky, I would just walk out and put that Post-it down on his desk, say, well, let's see what you can do, and just really push. But everyone is motivated by something different. It may not be that. It's, it might be
right.
a new car or whatever it is, but find out what motivates them and then push them in that direction.
Interesting. Yeah. And so it's always, like you said in sales, just find the carrot is what I say, right? And give them something to chase after. And I'm just thinking about what you said about pulling out your numbers. I'm one of those guys that would probably work with.
Yeah.
Right. Because I would take it almost as like a challenge to my ego. Typically, like the guy you're talking about is a little bit egotistical. I'm self-aware enough to know I have some of that. And I'd be like, what do you mean you could do? Okay, watch what I'm going to do. Right. Which is that friendly competition, which is good to get and have people kind of working with, but competing with each other at the same time. So that's really interesting. So one other thing I'm thinking, Chris, so with a team that big, I'm just curious if it's about 250 people. How many people did you hire to get to 250? It was more than 250 people, right? Because obviously you had to fire people along the way and you had to kind of pull out the bad weeds. And so I'm just curious, what was that like? How many people did you actually hire?
Man, I had a stack of resumes that sat on the floor, and I thought, well, you know what? Turnover is extremely high. I'm going to figure out the secret to hiring. I'm going to keep these resumes, and when someone becomes successful, I'm going to look back through it and point out some things, try and find some common. I could never figure it out. It's just a tough thing. It's not like you guys are on the software side. You can explain, here's what the job's going to be.
It's still hard. It's still hard, let me tell you.
So I tried, and referrals would always help because, their friends are going to tell them exactly. I think referrals work in any industry. We relied heavily on those, and for the most part, those tend to work better than others. I did find a few like jobs outside of TQL that when they applied and they had previously been a valet or a bartender, in those that they tend to have a little hustle to them. So I would give them the benefit of the doubt a lot, but I could never figure it out.
You just said something, a little bit of hustle. It's like drive. You could ask someone to interview, what's your drive like? Which I want to be a great interview question, but they would answer it, it's very high. And then you hire them and it's just not at all.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to identify that during the hiring process. So hire quick and fire just as quick. It's definitely something you have to keep in mind when hiring. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality of life. I used to ask that question a lot, but it's one thing to ask the question and then hear their answer. But then can you dig a layer deeper and find out? When I got hired, the manager who hired me asked me that. And he said, well, how do I know you've got drive? How do I know you're relentless and you're not going to stop? Can you give me an example? And I said, well, I play a lot of tennis and I've broken a lot of rackets. When it's a good response. And he said, okay. So, no, but a lot of the athletes on that side of things, I would ask them, a lot of those sports like tennis, golf, the ones where it's just a single person, they've got a little bit of drive. It's not a team sport where they can kind of hide. So I used to look for that as well. Yeah, I think one of the important things, especially with hiring, is identifying, do they actually want to be there and do they support the vision of the company, or are they here just for a paycheck? Because if you're keeping people around that are just there for the paycheck, you're not really going to have that true drive behind that employee who's trying to work for the company, make it better, increase sales or make your software better overall. I think that's also a hard thing to find when you're just, hiring the person at first. You won't identify that for, a few months in or 6 months in or a year. But,
do you all have any interview questions that you've used that stood out that you can think of? I always looked for them, and I'm always open to those ideas.
So my interview process is typically a lot different because we're interviewing a lot of very technical people. Mm-hmm. So it's really diving deep on the projects they worked on and asking the right questions to make sure the project that they worked on, they actually were a big part of it rather than, hey, I was just on the project. I want to make sure that they can describe how did they overcome difficult situations or problems when building certain platforms or projects, and how long did it take? Because you can tell very, very quickly if someone's being truly honest. Being technical myself about, is that real? Did you actually pull that off? The technical interview process is much different, but Michael on the sales side, Mike probably has some insight on that.
Yeah. So one of my favorite questions, we talked a little bit about this earlier with, I don't care where you're at on the org chart. If you have a good idea, you have a good idea. I want to know what you're thinking, especially in sales, right? In sales, because you have something, maybe your messaging or your talk track is working better, or this pain point you were able to illuminate, and maybe the way you pitched our pricing was different. There's so many different values that you can grab from people. So I'll ask people, in your current or previous roles, can you give me an example of where you spoke up to your boss and brought an idea to the forefront that was then implemented across the organization, or maybe taken into account to improve everything as a whole, when maybe you weren't that guy, you weren't the CEO, you weren't the VP, it didn't matter though. You spoke up in a way that was heard and implemented, because we want that inside of our organization.
Yes.
I don't care if you are like the smallest SDR, you might know something that might improve sales across the whole organization, and we want to hear it. So I asked those questions to say, like, tell me when you did this. I don't want to know hypothetically. Like, tell me when that actually happened.
Yes, I like that. It reminds me, one thing I started to do toward the end of when I was still hiring individuals, if I was on the fence about someone, and it speaks to your point here, I would turn them down. And I wanted to see what kind of response that I got and a recruiter got. Did they come back at me?
Interesting.
No, didn't know. I want this job. And I think that's a good technique to try.
Yeah, we did something similar to that with an engineer actually last year. She had applied for a role in our organization to become an executive assistant for me, actually. And I had turned her down, but I identified during the interviewing process that she should really be a software engineer. And so the reason I didn't want to move forward with her candidacy is that I didn't feel like I was serving her well in her career path.
Love that.
So she responded back and said, I want to work for you. I love the organization. And at no pay, which we ended up paying her, but we hired her as a junior software developer. And she's still with us today. So it is very interesting. And I think a lot of people do give up after they get denied from a job. Rather than shooting your shot, you really have nothing to lose. Speaking from, people who can be applying to jobs. If you get denied, try again, reach back out, offer a different angle to try to get that role if you truly believe in the company's vision and mission.
Yeah. I don't mean to sound like Eminem here, but you really get one shot at that interview, and you better have some energy when you go in there, because the ones who walked into my office smiling and had some energy to them, that was contagious with me, and it made me like the person. But you come in there down about it, and I talked to Jeremy about this. A lot of people are really nervous when they walk in there, but you've got to get over that, because you're not going to get another chance to go in there and make that first impression.
Yeah, Adrian just said something that's stands out. Interviewing the person with the top 6 problems you have and ask them how they would solve those situations. That's a interesting approach.
That's free advice right there with you.
Free advice.
I love that.
Adrian, are you paying them?
Give me some consulting work during the interview. That's so funny. Awesome. Let's switch gears real quick, because I think, Chris, there's some things that you could share with the audience that would be relevant to where we're at in this time of year. So it's bid season, right? Mm-hmm. You've gone through a lot of bid seasons. You've helped a lot of employees get through bid season. Talk to us a little bit about account planning and penetration and some of your best practices there, if you could.
Yeah, I would say on the customer, account penetration side and the outreach and those kind of things, I would be careful about planning too much. And, we talked briefly about this. Planning too much takes away from the authenticity of a conversation. It's not genuine anymore. And when you're having these calls, if you sit there and go, well, I'm going to say this, and when they say that, I'm going to pivot, it just gets awkward. So
sure.
I think, figure out who you're talking to and then have at it and listen to how they answer the phone. Or if you've known them for a while, learn more about their personal life and those things. And in regards to the bids, I mean, that's like how you got to have a crystal ball sometimes in our industry to be able to predict what's happening in 6 or 9 months from now. So it's never easy.
How did you go about building your carrier network to help even participate in those bids, right? And so, like, you could go get, an RFP, but if you don't have the carrier base to even respond in an intelligent way, go somewhere else, do something else, right? So talk to us a little bit about how you built up that carrier base and how you look at your carriers versus your customers.
Yeah, I think it's something that is too often overlooked in our industry in the brokerage side. Everyone is, well, I've got these customers and I've got these customers. Well, how are your carriers? What's your carrier base look like? And I made sure, especially at first, I was calling carriers and forming those relationships with them so that when I did get enough freight, that I had someone I could speak to. And if you have a good relationship with those carriers, if you pay them fairly, if you communicate with them, if you're transparent about appointment times and you don't lie about those things, because a lot do, I think you can really scale your book of business much quicker, especially in a tight market that we should see hopefully within the next year.
Good answer.
Yeah, it's overlooked too much. And like I said, I'm from Kentucky, and I started calling Kentucky carriers, and they were just good conversations. Turns out there were a few large carriers there, and we worked together, and I helped them get access to freight, and they helped me move it, and it was a win-win for both of us.
That's awesome. Yeah. So switching gears, Chris, I want to talk a little bit about Zelh Logistics, where you're at currently. Can you tell some plans that you have for 2024 or what you guys are primarily focused on? I know you guys are selective in who you work with. So tell us a little bit about that. What do you guys have in store?
Yeah, so Zelh's been around 6 years or so, but just in the past 6-7 months, we've really started to pour some gasoline on the logistics side. We have been very selective on who we brought on our leadership team. So my experience, we've got some others on the leadership team who were founding members of Uber Freight, some Transplace guys, FedEx, DHL guys. And what we've noticed is that when we have these conversations with clients and with carriers, whoever they may be, they say, well, you know what you're doing. You've built teams, you know the roles. Let me learn from your mistakes. And it really resonates. So what we've started to do is work with a few new clients who want our advice on ways to build teams. So we talk through that, and then we talk about the staff that we have in Eastern Europe, because the concept of outstaffing or remote staffing isn't new, but it's primarily in Latin America and Philippines. And so this Eastern European angle with the education, the work ethic, and you guys know that the carrier in the Midwest, there's a lot of Eastern European carriers. So
sure. Yeah.
When they have those conversations, it's, sometimes negotiating better rates, better carrier relationships. So what we want to do is be selective and give our clients access to that talent pool where they can have some cost savings, and then apply those cost savings to maybe more sales jobs domestically. Or maybe if you're a carrier, that savings that you get by using these individuals allows you to buy more assets. So I think it can be a win-win, and it's not we're taking American jobs and going that route.
Makes sense. So Chris, any last words that you want to add for the show or our audience? And how can people reach you if they want to reach out to you?
No, I'm just, I'd say, well, we're going to be upcoming conferences. I know a lot of the listeners go to conferences. We'll be at Manifest. We're going to have a nice booth out there with some different podcasters on. So please stop by there. Website is zelllogistics.com. And then I am very active on LinkedIn, and not just, I'm not just talking to clients or potential clients on there. I'm happy to speak with anyone and everyone and help network, because I think that's how we can all grow.
Awesome. Well, Chris, we appreciate having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. You have a ton of experience. A lot of people can learn from. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris. We'll see you at Manifest, man.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
Yeah, see you there.
All right, see you.
All right, guys. So yeah, Chris, thank you for joining us. And switching gears, next Friday, Michael and I are going to be having a discussion regarding should you buy your software or should you lease your software? So we're going to do a deep dive on that and what that looks like. So join us then. Other than that, we hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.